I found a woman buried to her neck in black sand, and something was circling back for her. My crawler's proximity alarm clicked twice as I killed the engine, leaving only the dry tick of cooling metal inside the cab. 50 yards ahead, between ridges of glassy sand, a pale face stared at me from the ground. At first I thought someone had mounted a ceremonial mask there. Then she blinked. I shoved open the hatch. Heat struck my face like an open furnace, carrying the bitter smell of scorched minerals and overheated coolant. "Don't move," I called, which was probably the stupidest thing I could have said to someone buried up to her neck. Her eyes tracked me as I slid down the crawler's ladder. Gold irises, ring-shaped pupils, strands of silver-white hair were plastered across skin that shimmered pearl green beneath the twin suns, flashes of violet appearing whenever she turned her head. Sand had crusted along her jaw. "Human," she rasped. Her voice sounded scraped raw. "Keep driving." I stopped 6 feet from her. "You always greet rescue crews like that." "You are not a rescue crew." "Fair point." I was Ethan Cole, field engineer, one battered mineral crawler, one folding shovel, and enough water to get myself back to the settlement if the condenser behaved. Nothing about that qualified as rescue. I crouched anyway. The sand around her had been packed deliberately. Smooth. Dense. Whoever had done this hadn't wanted her climbing out. 4 black stakes surrounded the burial site, each humming softly beneath the hiss of wind-blown grit. Symbols crawled across their surfaces in dim blue light. Aethari script. I couldn't read much of it, but frontier workers learned the important warnings fast. Quarantine. Sovereign territory. Execution. My mouth tasted metallic. "Who buried you?" Her gaze shifted past my shoulder. "People who will kill you for touching those stakes." I looked toward the horizon. 3 bright points hovered above the dunes. Too steady to be stars. Too low to be orbital traffic. They disappeared behind a ridge, then returned larger. "Vehicles? Friends of yours?" I asked. "No," the answer came instantly. I pulled my canteen free. When I held it toward her mouth, she turned away. "Save it. I've got a recycler." "Then save yourself." A gust swept across the basin, rattling sand against my visor like dry rain. I poured a little water onto a cloth and pressed it carefully against her cracked lips. This time she didn't turn away. Up close, I noticed the marks around her neck weren't restraints. They were narrow lines of metallic pigment arranged in an intricate pattern beneath the dust, too precise to be decoration from some mining camp. She carried herself strangely for someone with nothing visible above ground except her head. Chin level. Eyes steady, like I was the one standing before judgment. "How long?" I asked. "Long enough." One of the distant lights rose over the ridge. I heard the faint electric whine of an approaching skimmer. Maybe 8 minutes. 10 if the dunes slowed them. I walked to the nearest black stake. The warning symbols brightened as my glove approached. My suit translated one line. "Interference constitutes claim of sentence." "Claim," I muttered. The buried woman closed her eyes. "If you free me, their law may consider you responsible for what happens afterward." That's convenient. It is meant to discourage compassion. I looked at her. She opened her eyes again, and for the first time the gold rings trembled slightly. The skimmer's whine grew louder. I could climb back into my crawler. Hit full throttle. Forget the face in the sand. Instead, I snapped the folding shovel from my belt. Her pupils widened. "Human." I drove the blade into the packed earth beside her shoulder. The impact jarred my wrists. Beneath the sun-baked crust, the sand was almost stone. "What are you doing?" I planted my boot on the shovel and pushed harder, making a very bad professional decision. They will return. Then I'd better dig faster. The first slab of black sand broke loose with a brittle crack. Under it, I saw fabric, dark, fine, threaded with silver, and the edge of an insignia shaped like a 7-pointed crown. She saw me notice it. Her jaw tightened. Above the ridge, the first skimmer appeared, its hull flashing white in the sunlight. Then a second, then a third. I gripped the shovel with both hands and dug again. The shovel struck packed sand again, and the 3 Aethari skimmers dropped lower. Their engines made a thin, glassy whine that vibrated through my teeth. White sunlight flashed across their narrow hulls while hot grit rattled against my sleeves. I dug beside the woman's shoulder, careful not to drive the blade toward her body. The ground fought every inch. Whoever had buried her had mixed the black sand with some kind of binding compound. Each scoop came free in heavy slabs instead of loose grains. "Stop," she said. I didn't. "Ethan Cole." Hearing my name in her rough voice made me glance down. I had never told her my last name. She tipped her chin toward my chest. "My work patch. Cole, Frontier Extraction Systems. If they see you interfering," she continued, "your name will be entered with mine. Then spell it right." I drove my boot down. The shovel cracked through another layer. Beneath it, more of that dark fabric appeared around her shoulder, silver threads catching the light like frost. She sucked in a sharp breath when the pressure shifted. I dropped the shovel immediately and cleared the sand with my gloved hands. The grains were hot enough that warning bars pulsed amber across my wrist display. "Can you move your arm?" "Not yet." The nearest skimmer passed over the ridge. Maybe 3 miles out now. I could hear its propulsion field pulsing beneath the engine note. My crawler sat 50 yards behind me, ugly, slow, and armored against mining debris, not soldiers. I looked at the black stakes surrounding her. Their blue symbols had changed. A countdown now burned across each surface. 6:41. What happens at 0? She stared at the numbers. The sentence completes. Meaning, the beacons transmit confirmation of death. Her lips barely moved. And anyone standing inside their perimeter is recorded. 6 minutes. 41 seconds. I grabbed the nearest stake with both hands. A vibration crawled through my gloves. "Don't. You said touching these makes me responsible. Removing one makes you claim it." I froze. Claimant of what? Her gold eyes met mine. "Me." The word landed harder than the heat. Somewhere above us, a skimmer changed. "Pitch." I released the stake. "Explain." Aethari sentence law is old. Older than your colonies. A condemned noble abandoned beyond the city boundary may be claimed by an outsider who interrupts the punishment. Claimed as in rescued. Silence. That answered it. I looked at the woman buried to her neck, then at the legal warning glowing inches from my boots. Property. Her jaw tightened. Under the oldest interpretation. That's insane. Your opinion will not alter the statute. Good thing I'm an engineer, not a lawyer. I pulled a compact thermal cutter from my belt and aimed it at the packed ground 2 feet from her body. The tool screamed to life. Orange light washed over the sand. A sharp mineral smell rose as the binding compound softened. She twisted her head away from the glare. I cut a shallow trench, killed the beam, then attacked the weakened material with the shovel. A whole section collapsed outward. Her right shoulder came free. She dragged one arm from the sand, trembling from the effort, and planted a long, pearl-green hand against the ground. "Again," she whispered. I moved to the other side. 3:18. The skimmers were close enough now that their shadows occasionally swept across the basin. My suit picked up a transmission, cold and mechanical. Unauthorized human. Withdraw from the condemned zone immediately. The woman's fingers closed around my sleeve. "Go." I looked at the crawler, then at her. Half buried, barely able to lift one arm. 2:46. The transmission returned, louder. "Withdraw. The condemned remains under lawful sentence." I picked up the thermal cutter. No, her grip tightened. "You do not understand what you are accepting." "I understand exactly what I'm refusing." I fired the cutter into the sand. The orange beam screamed beneath the approaching engines. Nobody gets buried alive because a law says they belong to whoever digs them out. The first skimmer crossed overhead, throwing us into sudden shadow. A voice boomed from its external speakers. "Human Ethan Cole. Leave now, and no claim will be registered." I drove the shovel beneath another slab and tore it loose. More of her upper body came free. She pulled herself forward. An inch. The countdown hit 1:57. I threw the shovel aside, dropped to my knees, and started digging with both hands. "Register whatever you want," I shouted at the ships. "I'm getting her out." The first skimmer tilted its nose toward us, and a red targeting line burned across the sand beside my hand. I kept digging. Heat radiated through my gloves as I tore chunks of softened binder away from the woman's ribs, while overhead the propulsion fields beat the air with a low pressure I could feel in my chest. The countdown on the nearest execution beacon flashed 1:31. "Ethan." Her voice had changed. No command now. Just my first name, quiet beneath the engines. "Your left side." I looked up. The second skimmer was sweeping around behind the crawler. Smart. They weren't simply watching anymore. They were cutting off my only route out. I grabbed the thermal cutter and carved a crescent through the hardened sand around her waist. The tool shrieked against mineral binder, throwing orange reflections across her pearl green skin. A burnt stone smell filled my respirator. Move when I tell you. My legs are numb. Numb I can work with. You may damage them. Staying here seems worse. Something almost like a laugh escaped her, dry and brief. Your species has remarkable medical reasoning. We put warning labels on coffee. I killed the cutter. Ready? Her freed hand flattened against the ground. Silver threads in her dark clothing shimmered beneath the brutal white sunlight. I wedged the shovel under the cracked crust. Now. She pushed. I levered. The shell of compacted sand split with a sharp pop, collapsing away from her hips. She dragged herself forward, stopped, then sucked air through clenched teeth. Still trapped from mid-thigh down. 058. The speaker above us thundered. Human Ethan Cole. Cease interference. Step outside the marked perimeter. I ignored it. Final warning. Get in line. I dug around her knees. A shadow passed over us, cooling my back for half a second before the sunlight returned like a furnace door opening. The woman reached for the shovel. Give it to me. You can barely move. Her gold-ringed pupils narrowed. Then stop wasting time explaining that. I handed her the short auxiliary spade from my belt. She attacked the sand beside her own thigh, awkwardly at first, then with a controlled rhythm. Scrape. Pull. Breathe. I worked opposite her. For those last seconds there was no human and alien, no condemned prisoner and trespassing engineer. Just two people digging toward the same thing. 029. The red targeting line climbed from the ground onto my sleeve. Cole, the amplified voice said, withdraw and the condemned will remain our responsibility. The woman stopped digging. Her fingers closed around the spade. Go. I tore another slab loose. No. You have already done more than anyone would expect. That's a terrible standard. 017. I shoved both hands beneath the hardened sand around her boots and pulled upward. Nothing. I shifted my weight and pulled again. The binder cracked. She twisted, kicked once, and suddenly both legs came free in a cascade of black grit. I caught her before she hit the ground. She was taller than I expected, but after hours buried upright her legs refused to hold her. Her weight folded against my shoulder. The execution beacons began chiming. 008. Arm around me. She obeyed. I hauled her upright and half-carried her toward the crawler. 004. A pulse of blue light raced between the four stakes. 003. The woman looked back. 002. Ethan. 001. The basin flashed white. Every beacon went dark. For one strange second, even the skimmers became silent. Then my suit chimed. Legal status updated. I stared at the words crawling across my visor while the woman steadied herself against the crawler's hull. Claim registered. Ethan Cole. Subject. Vaelira Aethari. The name meant nothing to me yet. The designation beneath it did. Royal blood status confirmed. Royal? I said. Vaelira lifted her face toward the three ships. Their weapons were still pointed at us, but none fired. Then the lead skimmer descended until its landing struts touched the glassy sand 20 yards away. A side hatch opened with a hydraulic hiss. 3 armored Aethari stepped out, weapons lowered but ready. Their commander looked at Vaelira, then at me. Human, he called, the condemned is now legally yours. Surrender her to us voluntarily, and your claim will be compensated. Vaelira's hand tightened against my shoulder. I looked from the soldiers to the woman they had buried alive, then pulled open the crawler door. Get inside. Vaelira's fingers slipped from my shoulder as she tried to climb into the crawler, and I caught her before her knees struck the metal step. The hull was hot enough to sting through my gloves. Behind us, 3 skimmer engines hummed over the dunes, filling the air with the sharp smell of ionized dust. Easy, I said. I do not require. Her legs folded again. Yeah, you do. I lifted her across the threshold and lowered her onto the passenger bench. Black sand poured from her clothes and clicked against the steel floor. Vaelira immediately reached for the door controls. Not to close them, to push herself back outside. I blocked her hand. What are you doing? Ending this before they decide your claim law is less important than your life. Not happening. I slammed the hatch. The cabin dimmed to amber instrument light. Outside, the Aethari commander raised one hand, and my dashboard filled with an incoming transmission. Ethan Cole. You have interfered with a lawful sentence. The woman is registered under your authority. Transfer her voluntarily and depart unharmed. You buried her alive. Her sentence is not subject to human judgment. I glanced at Vaelira. Dust streaked her pearl-green face. She sat perfectly straight despite the tremor running through one hand. Apparently it is now. I cut the transmission and punched ignition. The crawler coughed, shuddered, then its 6 wheels bit into the glass dunes. A warning tone screamed immediately. Target lock. Your vehicle cannot outrun them, Vaelira said. It doesn't need to. I drove straight toward a field of crystalline ridges where mining scanners regularly failed. A white pulse struck the sand 20 feet to our right. The blast slapped the crawler sideways. Tools crashed from their brackets, and hot coolant mist hissed through a cracked vent, filling the cabin with a sweet chemical odor. Vaelira caught the dashboard with both hands. They are firing warning shots. That was comforting. If they intended to destroy us, we would already be dead. Even more comforting. Another pulse carved across the ground ahead. I yanked the steering column left and dropped us into a narrow ravine between 2 walls of black glass. The crawler's armor screamed as its sides scraped crystal. Sparks flashed past Vaelira's window. The skimmers climbed, unable to follow at our height without exposing their undersides to the razor formations. For 30 seconds there was only the grinding of tires and our breathing. Then a voice came through the emergency channel. Vaelira stiffened before the translator even engaged. Condemn Vaelira. Order your claimant to stop. She leaned toward the transmitter. He is not my claimant. The registry states otherwise. Then your registry is wrong. Silence answered her. I glanced sideways. You just argued with your own law? I have had a difficult day. Despite everything, a laugh escaped me. It lasted half a second. The ravine opened ahead, and all 3 skimmers were waiting above the exit. I hit the brakes. Dust rolled over the windshield in a dark wave. The commander's voice returned. Cole, final offer. 20,000 frontier credits. Your interference will be erased. Transfer the condemned. I looked at Vaelira. Her expression didn't change, but her hand slowly closed around the edge of the bench. That's a lot of money, she said. Yep. Your crawler appears to require extensive repairs. That obvious? It sounds as though several parts are negotiating their resignation. I looked at the warning lights covering my console, then at the 3-armed ships outside. 20,000 would fix most of them. Vaelira turned toward me. Then accept. I stared at her. They will take me regardless. There is no reason for you to lose everything with me. The external speaker crackled. 10 seconds, human. I reached between the seats and pulled the emergency release. Vaelira's door unlocked with a heavy metallic clunk. Her eyes moved to it, then back to me. 5 seconds. I leaned across her, pushed the door open, and hot desert air flooded the cabin. What are you doing? She asked. Giving. You the only choice anybody here seems determined not to give you. I pointed beyond the soldiers, toward the open desert. That door is unlocked. You want to go with them? Go. You want to walk away from me? Do that too. But I'm not selling you. The commander stepped forward. Cole. I turned the crawler's engine off. The sudden silence felt enormous. You want her? I called through the open hatch. Ask her. Vaelira stared through the open hatch at the soldiers who had buried her, then placed one unsteady foot onto the crawler's floor instead of stepping toward them. The Aethari commander's helmet reflected the twin suns as 2 hard white circles, and behind him the skimmers whispered over the black sand, their engines pushing hot air into the cabin with the smell of scorched minerals. Her consent is irrelevant, he said. I rested one hand on the steering column. Then you misunderstood me. A registered claimant possesses transfer authority. I'm not transferring anybody. The commander raised 2 fingers. His soldiers spread apart. Vaelira's hand closed around the door frame. Her legs still shook, but she pulled herself upright until her head nearly touched the cabin ceiling. You offered him payment for me, she said. The commander didn't answer her. That seemed to bother her more than an insult would have. 20,000 credits, I said. That's your price. Compensation for inconvenience. She has a name. The commander's visor turned toward me. You are risking armed conflict over property you acquired less than 10 minutes ago. I reached across the console and pressed the exterior release. The crawler door swung wider with a metallic groan. For an instant, Vaelira looked at me as if I had changed my mind. Instead, I tapped the illuminated door control and rotated the panel toward her. Your side, I said. Your controls. She looked down at the switch beneath her fingers. Open. Close. Lock. No authorization request. No claimant override. The commander stepped forward. Cole, do not confuse possession with moral authority. I'm not. I removed my hand from the controls. That's the point. Vaelira touched the lock. The hatch slammed shut. Between her and the soldiers. A second later, the cabin lights turned red. Weapon lock detected. Good answer, I said. She sank onto the passenger bench. I did not answer you. You closed the door. I punched the ignition. The crawler's engine coughed, caught, and filled the cabin with a deep mechanical growl. Outside, the commander lifted his weapon. Vaelira suddenly leaned across me and struck a sequence into the external transmitter. Her voice changed when she spoke, not louder, but sharpened into something that made even the translator hesitate. The words were Aethari, ancient-sounding, precise. The effect outside was immediate. The commander stopped. One soldier lowered his weapon. Another dropped to one knee before catching himself and rising again. I looked at Vaelira. She had gone still. What did you say? Drive. That guy just bowed to you. Ethan. A pulse struck the ravine wall behind us. Black crystal burst into glittering fragments. I floored the accelerator. The crawler surged forward as another shot scorched the sand where we had been sitting. We hit the ravine mouth at 38 miles per hour, suspension hammering beneath us. Vaelira braced against the dashboard while I aimed for a narrow maintenance cut between two glass ridges. The crawler barely fit. Crystal screamed along both sides of the armor. Sparks sprayed past the windows like orange rain. One skimmer followed too low and pulled away before its wing clipped the formation. They'll go over, Vaelira said. That's what I'm counting on. I hit the mining console and activated an old seismic charge buried in the abandoned survey line ahead. The screen asked for confirmation. I pressed it. A dull thump rolled through the ground. 30 yards behind us, the upper edge of the ridge collapsed into the cut, filling the passage with tons of fractured black crystal. Dust swallowed the pursuing skimmers. I kept driving until their engine noise disappeared beneath the crawler's rattling frame. Only then did I ease off the throttle. Vaelira was watching me. Sand still clung to her silver-white hair. You could have taken the credits, she said. We covered that. Or demanded something else. Like what? Technology. Protection. Political access. Her eyes dropped to the door controls I had given her. Or me. I pulled the crawler onto an old service road. Listen carefully, Vaelira. Whatever your law put on my registry doesn't change what you are. And what am I? Not mine. The engine filled the silence between us. Her fingers slowly left the lock switch. Then why did you dig? I looked ahead at the dark road cutting through the dunes. Because you were buried. Nothing more. Behind us, a distant skimmer rose above the ridge. I pushed the throttle forward. Vaelira reached for her door controls and locked them herself. Not against me. Against the people coming to take her back. The first drops of plasma rain struck the crawler roof like handfuls of nails, and Vaelira looked up at a sky turning electric blue. I watched the charge meter plunge as static crawled across the windshield in branching white veins. The glass dunes ahead vanished behind a curtain of luminous dust. That storm wasn't on the forecast, I said. Your forecast was designed for human weather. Weather usually respects species boundaries. Apparently yours does not. A blue arc snapped across the hood with a gunshot crack. Every display flickered. The steering column kicked beneath my palms, and the crawler's left motor dropped offline. We lurched sideways, grinding through loose black sand before I killed the drive. Inside the cabin, overheated insulation gave off the bitter smell of burned plastic. Outside, the storm swallowed the distant skimmers completely. Good news. The bad news was everything else. I pulled up an old survey map. There's a mining station 3 miles east. Vaelira shifted on the bench and tried to stand. Her knees buckled immediately. She caught the ceiling rail before I could reach her. I can walk. Sure. I opened a storage compartment and tossed her my spare thermal coat. You can also freeze. The temperature had dropped almost 40 degrees since the storm front hit. She stared at the coat, then at me. Is this another human claim ritual? It's polyester. 10 minutes later, I had the crawler limping through the storm on 5 motors. Blue light flashed across Vaelira's face while frozen grit hissed against the windows. We reached the abandoned station just before the remaining drive temperature entered the red. I backed through a corroded pressure door and shut it behind us. Silence fell hard. The station smelled of rust, old lubricant, and mineral dust. Emergency strips painted the walls in weak amber light. Vaelira stepped down without asking for help. She made 3 steps. On the 4th, her hand struck the wall. I caught her elbow. This time she didn't argue. I guided her onto an equipment bench and opened the crawler's medical kit. Sand had rubbed the skin around her shoulders raw, and faint heat burns crossed the side of her neck where the surface had baked under the suns. Nothing severe, but dehydration had turned her movements stiff and deliberate. I held out a scanner. Permission. Her eyes narrowed. For what? To touch you. The room went quiet except for the storm humming against the outer door. Vaelira looked at the scanner, then slowly extended her arm. Granted. I checked her temperature, cleaned the irritated skin, and applied a cooling membrane. She watched every movement. When I finished, I broke my last full ration bar in half and handed her 1 piece. You require more calories than I do, she said. Probably. Then why divide it equally? Because I'm eating in front of you. She studied the ration as though it contained a difficult equation. I left her with the water recycler and went to the generator. 1 coolant line had split. I cut out the damaged section, fitted a bypass, and brought the station heaters online. Warm air pushed through the vents, carrying the dusty smell of machinery waking after years of sleep. When I returned, Vaelira had eaten exactly half her ration and left the rest untouched. Saving it? I asked. She pushed it toward me. Dividing equally. I took it without comment. My pulse pistol was still clipped to my belt. I removed it, set it on the table between us, and slid it toward her side. Her gold-ringed eyes followed it. Why? Because the door controls are yours, the weapon is within your reach, and when the storm clears, you decide where. You go. She stared at the pistol. Your registry says I belong to you. My registry can learn to be disappointed. You could command me. I could also lick the coolant manifold. Having an option doesn't make it intelligent. A small sound escaped her, not quite laughter, but close. Then she looked at the unlocked door, the weapon, the half-empty ration wrapper. Among my people, she said softly. No one with legal ownership would do this. I leaned against the warm generator housing. Then it's a good thing I don't own you. Vaelira picked up the pistol. For a moment, its dark metal rested across her palm. Then she turned it around and offered the grip back to me. Keep your weapon, Ethan Cole. I took it. Her fingers released it without hesitation. Outside, plasma thunder rolled across the dunes. Inside, for the first time since I had pulled her from the sand, Vaelira chose to close the distance between us, dragging her chair across the metal floor until she sat beside the heater instead of beside the exit. The station lights died while Vaelira was still sitting beside me, and in the darkness, she finally told me why they had put her in the sand. The heater fan wound down with a tired metallic whine. A second later, cold air began creeping through my sleeves. Outside, plasma thunder rolled across the dunes, blue flashes leaking through the seams of the pressure door and briefly turning Vaelira's skin silver. Generator tripped, I said. I clicked on my wrist lamp. Its narrow beam cut through floating dust and caught her gold-ringed eyes. Stay here. You have said that before. And you ignored me before. Then perhaps improve your instructions. I almost smiled as I opened the service panel. The backup relay had fused. I pulled the hot component free with insulated pliers, smelled scorched copper, and bridged the contacts with a spare conductor from my crawler kit. Sparks snapped against my gloves. The generator coughed once, but the lights stayed dead. Manual reset, I muttered. Other side of the station. Vaelira stood. Her knees trembled, yet this time they held. We go together. You're supposed to be recovering. I recovered enough to recognize. An argument you will lose. We crossed the station by wrist light. My boots rang against grated flooring while hers made a softer rhythm behind me. The maintenance corridor was barely 3 feet wide, its walls cold and rough with mineral corrosion. Halfway through, a pressure seal jammed. I braced my shoulder against the wheel. Vaelira put both hands beside mine. On 3, humans count before applying force. We like ceremony. 3. You skipped 2. She pushed anyway. The wheel broke loose with a groan, and stale air rushed past us carrying the smell of rust and old machine oil. At the far end, I reset the breaker. Amber lights blinked awake one by one. When we returned, Vaelira stopped beside the heater, but didn't sit. Her fingers touched the silver insignia at her collar, the 7-pointed crown I had seen beneath the sand. You noticed this? Hard not to. And the registry identified royal blood. Also hard to miss. She removed the insignia. In the warm light, it looked less like jewelry than a piece of machinery, each point etched with microscopic lines. She placed it on the table between us. My name is Vaelira Aethari. I know that part. You do not know the rest. She drew a slow breath. I am first heir to the Aethari throne. The heater clicked. Somewhere in the walls, coolant began circulating again. I looked at the woman I had pulled from the ground, then at the crown insignia. So those soldiers buried their own princess. Yes. Why? Her gaze stayed on the metal emblem. Because I refused to sign an order. That gets you executed? Not officially. She touched the edge of the insignia with one fingertip. The order would have transferred several outer colonies into military administration. Their labor, their ports, their populations. Once signed by the heir, it could not be challenged when I took the throne. And you wouldn't sign. They told me stability required obedience. Sounds expensive for everyone except the people saying it. Her eyes lifted to mine. I refused publicly. No speech followed. No dramatic explanation. She simply closed her fingers around the insignia until its points disappeared inside her palm. My death makes the next succession uncontested. The storm struck the pressure door with a deep boom. I leaned against the table. And burying you outside the city lets them call it a lawful sentence instead of an execution. Yes. Then whoever replaces you gets the throne. Yes. I looked at the unlocked door controls, then at the legal claims still glowing faintly on my wrist display. Claimant, Ethan Cole, a princess reduced to a line of ownership because she had refused to make other people property. I opened the registry interface. What are you doing? Vaelira asked. I selected claimant authority, entered my identification, and disabled every permission the system allowed me to disable. Movement restriction, financial transfer, command privilege, custodial restraint. One by one, they turned gray. Vaelira stepped closer. Ethan, those permissions protect your legal claim. That's the problem. If you remove them, you surrender leverage. Good. The final option appeared. Transfer control to subject. Restricted until OFF world jurisdiction. I pressed it anyway. Access denied. Vaelira stared at the screen. I shut it off. Your law won't let me free you yet. She said nothing. I picked up my repair kit and headed toward the crawler. So I'll get you somewhere it will. Behind me came the quiet scrape of her chair moving aside. Then her footsteps followed. Ethan. I stopped. Vaelira stood beneath the amber light, the royal insignia resting in her open palm. If you take me beyond E3 jurisdiction, you will lose every legal protection that claiming me gave you. Good. They may still come for us. Then we keep moving. She watched me for a long second, then closed her hand around the crown. All my life, humans were described to me as a species obsessed with possession. I opened the maintenance door. Cold blue light spilled across the floor. Maybe somebody wrote the report before meeting one. Vaelira stepped through beside me. Then take me beyond their law, Ethan Cole. By dawn, the storm had weakened enough to move, but Vaelira stopped me with one question before I could start the crawler. How many strangers have you nearly died for? The maintenance. They smelled of hot metal and ozone as I tightened the bypass on the damaged left motor. Pale blue light leaked through the pressure door seams, and somewhere outside, frozen grit whispered across the station walls. Nearly died is dramatic. 3 armed skimmers pursued you across a desert. I've had worse Mondays. She stood beside the crawler wearing my thermal coat over her sand-stained clothes. Her legs were steadier now. That is not an answer. I slid from beneath the chassis and wiped coolant from my gloves. Why does it matter? Because I need to understand what you expect from me. I looked at her. Nothing. Her jaw tightened. Everyone expects something. Not for pulling somebody out of the ground. Among the Aethari, sacrifice creates obligation. Then don't call it sacrifice. I climbed onto the crawler's side rail and reseated a power coupler. It snapped into place, and the motor indicator shifted from red to amber. Vaelira followed me around the vehicle. A soldier risks himself for his unit because the unit protects his bloodline. A royal guard dies because his family gains honor. Even mercy creates debt. Sounds exhausting. It is order. It sounds like accounting. Her gold-ringed eyes narrowed. You crossed an execution boundary for a woman whose name you did not know. Correct. You rejected 20,000 credits. Also correct. You disabled legal authority over someone your lawfully recognized claim permitted you to command. Your law, not mine. Why? The word echoed through the empty bay. I set down my wrench. I used to work aerospace rescue before I came out here. She waited. I didn't give her a heroic story because there wasn't one. When a transport folds a landing strut or a pressure cabin jams after impact, you cut people out. Sometimes you know who's inside. Usually you don't. And you risk yourself without knowing their worth. Worth? Whether they deserve the risk. I stared at her for a second, then picked up the wrench again. You don't interview somebody before opening a burning hatch. That is irrational. Probably. I tightened the last coupling. But trapped people don't have to prove they deserve to. Be pulled out. Silence settled behind me. When I turned, Vaelira was looking at her own hands. Black grains still clung beneath her nails from the burial pit. Among my people, she said, a person who interfered with my sentence would either want the throne behind my name or the ownership attached to my body. I shut the maintenance panel harder than necessary. Metal rang through the bay. And that's exactly what I refuse. Even knowing what I am. Especially knowing what you are. She looked up. A princess. A person everybody keeps trying to turn into something useful. Her fingers curled slowly. Outside, thunder rolled far across the dunes. I climbed into the crawler and ran diagnostics. The repaired motor spun with a rough mechanical growl. Good enough. Vaelira entered the passenger side and closed her own door. There is something your species does that mine considers dangerous, she said. Only one thing. You separate value from usefulness. I glanced at her. We're not always good at it. But you believe it can be done. I believe it should be. She watched the windshield as I opened the pressure door. Cold air rushed inside, smelling of wet minerals and charged dust. Beyond the station, the glass dunes glittered beneath a clearing violet sky. I eased the crawler forward. A warning flashed on my navigation screen. Aethari jurisdiction boundary, 47 miles. Vaelira saw it too. Crossing that line would strip away the legal protection of my claim and leave her free, but it would also leave us exposed if the hunters found us. I set our course directly toward it. Ethan. Yeah. You said trapped people do not need to prove their worth. They don't. Her voice dropped beneath the rumble of the engine. Then perhaps the thing my people fear about humans is not your strength. I looked over. Morning light caught the violet shimmer beneath her skin. What is it? Vaelira turned toward the boundary ahead. You can choose to care when there is no reward for caring. The distance counter dropped to 46 miles. I pushed the throttle forward. Then they'd better get used to it. The jurisdiction marker was still 2 miles ahead when I stopped the crawler beside an abandoned survey shuttle and handed Vaelira its ignition key. The little craft sat half buried against a ridge of black crystal, its hull bleached gray by years of twin sun exposure. Wind dragged cold sand across its landing pads with a dry scraping sound, and the morning light flashed violet through fractures in the glass dunes. Vaelira looked from the key in my palm to the shuttle. You intend to steal that? Salvage. It has an owner identification. A company that went bankrupt 11 years ago. Convenient. Frontier law is beautiful when it agrees with me. I climbed beneath the shuttle's engine cowling. The power cell was alive, but the ignition bus had corroded through. I stripped copper from my crawler's auxiliary lighting circuit, bridged the damaged contacts, then sealed them with thermal resin. The smell of hot polymer mixed with mineral dust. Behind me, Vaelira said, your crawler will lose its exterior lights. I'm planning to drive during the day. You make expensive decisions very casually. Wait until you see what I do with the shuttle. 20 minutes later, its turbine spun up, blowing warm grit across my boots. I climbed into the cockpit and checked navigation. Range, 680 miles. Enough to cross Aethari jurisdiction and reach the neutral freight corridor. I programmed the coordinates, disabled the owner lock, then climbed back out. Vaelira waited beside the ramp. I tossed her the key. She caught it. There. There what? Your transportation. Her eyes moved toward my crawler. Ours. Yours. The wind pulled strands of silver-white hair across her face. You are not coming. You don't need me to. She stared at the key. The hunters may find you. They want you. Because they believe you possess me. Then I'll tell them they're behind on current events. I reached past her and tapped the shuttle's door control. The ramp lowered with a hydraulic hiss. Warm cabin air rolled over us, carrying the dusty smell of old upholstery. Neutral jurisdiction is 31 miles east. Once you cross it, my registered claim has no enforcement. Keep flying another 100 miles, and you'll hit civilian traffic. Vaelira didn't move. What payment do you require? None. Ethan, we've done this. A vehicle, fuel, repairs, your legal protection. You are surrendering all of it. Correct. For nothing. For you to leave because you choose to leave. She looked into the empty shuttle. No guards. No restraints. No claimant controls. I stepped away from the ramp. This is the part where you go. Vaelira climbed aboard. Each footstep made a hollow metallic sound inside the cabin. She reached the cockpit and paused without turning around. Then the ramp rose between us. I walked back to my crawler. The shuttle turbines climbed into a high whine. Sand blasted across my legs as the craft lifted, banked east, and became a silver point against the pale sky. I watched until it crossed the jurisdiction line on my wrist display. My registry flashed once. Claim terminated. Subject outside enforcement authority. I deleted the record. Good, I said to nobody. I climbed into the crawler and reached for the ignition. A shadow passed across the windshield. I looked up. The shuttle was coming back. It descended 30 yards ahead and settled onto the sand. The ramp opened. Vaelira walked down alone, still holding the key. I stepped out. Engine trouble? No. Navigation? Accurate. Then why are you back? She stopped a few feet from me. The boundary was behind her now. She could leave. No Aethari statute tied her to my name. No registry called her mine. Every person who ever opened a door for me, she said, decided beforehand which direction I was expected to walk through it. The wind moved softly through her silver hair. You did not. I said nothing. She placed the shuttle key in my palm, then closed my fingers around it. I crossed the boundary. Your claim is gone. I know. Then understand me clearly, Ethan Cole. Her gold-ringed eyes held mine. I am not returning because your law commands it. I am not returning because I owe you for digging me free. She stepped past me toward the crawler, then looked back. I am returning because, for the first time, the choice is mine. The distress signal reached us 11 miles from the human settlement, repeating through the crawler speakers beneath a wash of static. Frontier Station 7 requesting immediate assistance. Aethari military units have entered the perimeter. Civilians confined to central habitat. I tightened my hands on the steering column. The glass dunes rolled beneath the tires, bright as shattered mirrors under the afternoon suns, while the cabin smelled of warm circuitry and the mineral dust leaking through our battered seals. Beside me, Vaelira leaned toward the transmitter. Replay it. I did. Same human voice. Same clipped transmission. Then another signal cut across it, cleaner and much stronger. An Aethari officer spoke through the translator. Ethan Cole. Vaelira Aethari. Your location is known. Return the former heir before sunset. The human settlement will otherwise be treated as harboring a condemned fugitive. Vaelira reached for the transmitter. I caught her wrist before she touched it. No, her gold-ringed eyes turned toward me. There are civilians there. Which is why we're not answering exactly how they want. They came because of me. They came because they chose to threaten people who never met you. She pulled her wrist free. That distinction will comfort the humans when soldiers enter their homes. I braked behind a crystal ridge 3 miles from the settlement and killed the engine. Silence rushed into the cabin. Through the windshield, I could see thin columns of smoke beyond the dunes and white Aethari skimmers hovering over the habitat domes. Their searchlights moved across the buildings in slow blue bands. Vaelira opened her door. Where are you going? To surrender. I climbed out after her. Heat pressed against my face, carrying the smell of scorched insulation from the settlement. No, she kept walking. Her borrowed thermal coat snapped in the dry wind. Your authority over me ended at the boundary. Exactly. I stepped around her and blocked the path. Which means you don't get to pretend I'm making this decision for you. Move. No, Ethan. They buried you because you wouldn't sign people away. Now they threaten innocent people, and suddenly you're going to hand them exactly what they want. I am choosing this. No. They're choosing it for you with hostages. Her jaw tightened. Behind her, one of the skimmers shifted position above the settlement, its engines making a distant insect hum. If my surrender prevents harm, the choice is simple. That isn't a choice. That's coercion wearing clean clothes. Vaelira stepped closer. You dug me out because you believed my life had value. Still do. Then believe theirs does too. I do. I pulled the shuttle key from my pocket and pressed it into her palm, which is why we use the one advantage they haven't accounted for. She looked down. What advantage? They think I'm still trying to keep you. I pointed toward the abandoned survey shuttle following our route on autopilot half a mile behind. You take the shuttle west. Cross back into neutral traffic. I take the crawler to the settlement. They will capture you. Maybe. And then they discover the human claimant arrived without anything to claim. Her fingers closed around the key. No, Vaelira, you gave me freedom yesterday. Do not insult it today by deciding how I must use it. The word stopped me. Wind whispered over the black crystal between us. She turned toward the settlement. I will surrender, and they'll bury freedom with you a second time. Vaelira went still. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. You told me you came back because the choice was yours. Keep it that way. The emergency channel suddenly crackled. Cole, 5 minutes. A red timer appeared on my wrist display. For 59. Present Vaelira at the southern gate, or enforcement begins. Vaelira looked at the countdown. Then she removed the 7-pointed royal insignia from beneath my thermal coat and placed it in my hand. If I surrender, they stop. Until the next person refuses them. For 41. She looked toward the settlement again. I could see the decision forming in the way her shoulders straightened. I grabbed the transmitter. What are you doing? Changing what they think the choice is. I opened the channel. This is Ethan Cole. Vaelira stays where she is. Release the civilians, and I'll come in. Static answered first. Then the officer's voice. You have no value without the former. Air. I looked at Vaelira's insignia in my palm. Then you won't mind letting me through the gate. The channel went silent. Vaelira stared at me. Ethan, no. The timer reached 4:12. I started the crawler and turned it toward the settlement. You don't get to call surrender a sacrifice just because you're royal. The southern gate opened for me with 30 seconds left on the ultimatum, and every Aethari weapon turned toward my empty passenger seat. I drove the crawler through at walking speed. Blue searchlights washed across the cracked windshield, catching dust suspended inside the cabin, while outside the air carried the sharp smell of burned wiring from the settlement's damaged power grid. Human civilians stood behind transparent habitat barriers 50 yards away. Aethari soldiers lined the road between us. I stopped exactly where they ordered. Engine off, the commander said. I killed it. The sudden silence left only cooling metal ticking beneath my boots. Exit. I stepped down with Vaelira's 7-pointed insignia hidden inside my glove. The commander approached. Where is she? Free. His helmet tilted. You misunderstand your position. No. You misunderstood mine. I looked past him toward the settlement's communications tower, an old frontier relay built from human hardware patched into Aethari orbital infrastructure. I had repaired systems like it for years. Different manufacturer. Same principles. Power. Signal. Redundancy. You believed she would follow you here, the commander said. I was counting on you believing that. His soldiers closed around me. One removed my pulse pistol. Another searched my jacket. I let them. What he didn't notice was the maintenance transponder clipped inside my boot, the same kind frontier extraction systems used to diagnose remote machinery. Release the civilians. When Vaelira is surrendered, then your ultimatum was never about them. It was about compliance. There it was. Clean. Simple. I shifted my heel twice. The transponder woke. A tiny vibration touched my ankle. The relay tower answered. You cannot protect her, the commander continued. No. I watched diagnostic text crawl across my wrist. Display. Remote maintenance link established. But I can make sure everyone sees what you're doing. His visor snapped toward my wrist. Too late. I triggered the relay. Every screen in the settlement flashed white. So did the displays mounted on the skimmers. The tower above us emitted a deep electrical hum as I forced the emergency channel beyond local bandwidth and into the Aethari civil network. Stop him. 2 soldiers grabbed my arms. I dropped to one knee, keeping my wrist angled toward the transponder. Uploading Vaelira's insignia authorization took 3 seconds. The royal encryption inside it took 2 more. Access accepted. You wanted the air? I said. Here's her authority. The network opened. I transmitted everything the crawler had recorded since the glass dunes, the execution beacons, the legal claim, the commander offering 20,000 credits for Vaelira, the threats against the human settlement. Not an accusation. Evidence. Their own voices. Their own law. Their own weapons. The commander tore the wrist unit from my arm and crushed it beneath his boot. The tower kept transmitting. Disconnect the relay, he shouted. Soldiers ran toward the control building. I looked at the nearest public screen. Viewer count climbed faster than I could read. Thousands. Hundreds of thousands. Millions. Aethari military channels began overlapping across the speakers. Questions. Challenges. Orders contradicting orders. The commander seized my collar. What have you done? Made it public. You think witnesses will save her? No. I looked at the civilians behind the barrier. I think they make burying people harder. A new engine note rolled over the settlement. I knew it before I saw the craft. The survey shuttle came low over the western ridge. No, I whispered. Vaelira had come back. Again. The shuttle landed outside the gate, and she walked down the ramp alone. Soldiers immediately raised their weapons. Hold fire, the commander shouted. Vaelira continued toward us, silver hair moving in the hot wind. Ethan Cole, she called. I told you not to decide how I use my freedom. This was not the lesson I hoped you'd take from that. The corner of her mouth moved once. Then the commander shoved me aside and ordered his soldiers forward. Red targeting beams appeared across Vaelira's coat. I stepped between them and her. Move, the commander said. I stayed where I was. She is the condemned. She's a person. Move. Behind me, Vaelira said my name. Quietly. I could hear the relay tower whining above us as its overloaded circuits climbed past tolerance. The commander raised his weapon. Last warning. I looked at the woman they had once left with only her face above the sand, then at the soldiers waiting for me to value my life more than hers. I planted my feet. No, the tower erupted in a blinding white flash, and the ground disappeared beneath me. Sound came back before light, a high metallic ringing. Then Vaelira shouting my name somewhere beyond the weight crushing my chest. I opened my eyes to a narrow strip of violet sky. Everything else was gray dust, broken composite, and black vitrified sand. The relay tower had folded across the southern gate. Its support frame shattered into glowing sections that hissed where coolant touched hot metal. Something heavy pinned my left leg. Another slab rested inches above my shoulder. Every breath pulled the smell of ozone and powdered concrete through my teeth. Ethan, still here. It came out weaker than I intended. Footsteps scraped over debris. Then Vaelira appeared above me, silver-white hair darkened with dust, one sleeve torn at the shoulder. She dropped to her knees. Do not move. Wasn't planning on it. Her hands went immediately to the slab across my leg. Too heavy, I said. There's a support beam underneath. Clear around the right side first. She began digging, not calling soldiers, not issuing orders. Digging. Her fingers tore through hot sand and fractured insulation while blue emergency lights flashed across her pearl green skin. I watched black grit collect beneath her nails. The image hit me harder than the explosion had. Vaelira. Quiet. You have an army standing behind you. Then they can wait. Only then did I look past her. The Aethari soldiers had lowered their weapons. Their commander stood 20 feet away, but 2 of his own guards had taken his weapon and forced him to his knees. Every surviving public display around the settlement still showed fragments of my broadcast. Viewer count, 83,402,771. Rising. A military channel crackled through the dust. Royal Guard Command acknowledges First Air Vaelira Aethari. Council detention orders suspended pending tribunal review. Another voice followed. All units stand down. Vaelira didn't even look up. She dug faster. Princess, one guard called. We can assist. Not yet. Her voice cut through the ruined gate like steel. She pushed both hands beneath the support beam. Ethan, when I lift, pull your leg toward me. You're not lifting that. Her gold eyes locked onto mine. You once ignored excellent advice from me beside a burial pit. Despite the pain, I breathed out something close to a laugh. Fair. She braced one boot against the hardened sand and lifted. The beam shifted half an inch. I pulled. Nothing. She reset her grip. Her fingers trembled against the rough metal. Again. This time 2 royal guards stepped forward. Vaelira looked at them and nodded. Together, they raised the beam enough for me to drag my leg free. She caught my jacket and pulled me clear as the broken structure settled behind us with a deep, grinding crash. For several seconds, I lay on my back, staring at the sky. Vaelira knelt beside me, breathing hard. Fine cuts marked her palms, nothing severe, but dust and black sand covered both hands. I lifted one of them. You could have let them dig. I know. Then why didn't you? She looked toward the ruined tower, then toward the distant glass dunes beyond the settlement. Because when I could not move, you did not stand above me and give orders. Her fingers closed around mine. You knelt. Boots approached. The former commander was brought forward under guard. His helmet was gone now. Without it, he looked smaller. First Heir, one guard said. The network is demanding confirmation of your authority. Vaelira rose slowly. I expected her to take the commander's place, to stand above him the way he had stood above us. Instead, she looked toward the human civilians emerging from the habitat shelters. Release every civilian. Disarm every unit operating under the Council's detention order. No reprisals. Yes, Highness. The guards moved immediately. Vaelira turned back to me. Can you stand? Define stand. She put my arm over her shoulder. I pushed myself upright. My injured leg protested, but held. Around us, Aethari soldiers lowered their weapons as humans stepped cautiously into the sunlight. The balance of power had changed without a shot being fired at Vaelira. She had her command back, her name back, her freedom back, and my legal claim over her had vanished miles ago. Vaelira looked down at the sand covering her hands, then at me. You dug me free when their law called me yours. She tightened her arm around my waist and helped me take the first step. Now here my first command is heir. I raised an eyebrow. That sounds dangerous. No one will ever own another person under my crown again. 3 months later, I stood at the same patch of glass dunes and watched Queen Vaelira order the last execution beacon pulled from the sand. The machine came free with a grinding metallic shriek, shedding black grains from its buried base. Evening heat still radiated through my boots, but the twin suns had dropped low enough to turn every crystal ridge copper and violet. Workers carried the beacon away without ceremony. No monument to the law. No preserved instrument of punishment. Just scrap. Vaelira stood beside me in a simple dark coat threaded with silver, the 7-pointed crown resting against her brow. She had refused the elevated platform her attendants had built. Instead, she walked across the sand until her boots stopped exactly where I remembered seeing only her face above the ground. For a while, neither of us spoke. Wind moved through her silver-white hair. The new memorial behind us was nothing more than a curved wall of pale stone bearing the names of those who had been sentenced here. No ranks, no bloodlines, no distinction between royal and common. The first decree Vaelira had signed as queen abolished ownership claims created through punishment. The second ended burial sentences entirely. The third made coerced transfer of a person illegal throughout Aethari territory. She had handed me copies of all 3 that morning. I had handed them back. You still refuse everything, she said. Not everything. A title. Definitely. And a state. Too much maintenance. 20,000 credits. I looked at her. That number again. I thought you might appreciate the symmetry. I appreciate my crawler running, which the royal engineers repaired. Without asking. Consider it compensation for repeatedly damaging it while rescuing your queen. You weren't queen when I found you. Her gold-ringed eyes caught the dying sunlight. No, I was considerably shorter. I laughed before I could stop myself. She looked toward the place where the final beacon had stood. The workers had filled the hole, but the replacement sand remained darker than everything around it. I returned here alone before the coronation, she said. Why? To see whether it still felt like a grave. Did it? She bent, picked up a handful of sand, and let it run between her fingers. No. A transport waited several hundred yards away, engines humming softly. Mine waited in the opposite direction. The same battered crawler, newly repaired and still ugly. Vaelira noticed where I was looking. You could stay at the palace. I could. You could leave Aethari space tonight. I could do that too. She turned toward me. There was no guard close enough to hear us now. No registry glowing on my wrist. No law between her choices and mine. You once asked why I didn't keep you, I said. I remember. People aren't things you keep. I know that now. You knew it before. She shook her head. I knew ownership could be cruel. That is not the same as understanding freedom. The wind lifted a thin veil of black sand between us. Vaelira looked down at her hands, the same hands that had dug through vitrified debris to pull me from beneath the fallen tower. When you freed me, I believed the remarkable act was that you refused payment. She raised her eyes. Then I believed it was that you surrendered your claim. And now I understand it was simpler. She stepped closer. You never believed there was anything to surrender. I didn't answer. Nothing needed answering. Vaelira removed her crown. She held it for a moment, then placed it on the memorial wall. Not discarded, just set aside. Queen became woman in one small movement. Then she extended her hand. Not an order, not gratitude, not repayment. I looked at it, remembering a face surrounded by black sand and a voice telling me to keep driving. I took her hand. Her fingers closed around mine. We walked away from the burial ground together, neither toward her royal transport nor toward my crawler at first, just along the ridge while the twin suns sank behind the glass dunes. Behind us stood a memorial to everyone the old law had treated as something less than a person. Ahead, 2 sets of footprints crossed untouched sand side by side. No chain connected them. No decree required them. No debt measured the distance between them. The day I found Vaelira, they had buried a princess and expected me to claim what I pulled from the sand. Instead, I gave her back the one thing no crown, law, or human had the right to keep, herself.